take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but we're flying.
Hey, welcome to episode 228 of the Take Flight podcast with myself, Daniel, Shuel, Pabilo, and Olu. Did not do that in alphabetical order because my brain couldn't fathom that on a short space of time. But nevertheless, it's your favorite quartet back with another episode. In this week's episode of Take Flight podcast, we're going to dive in to the world of Apple, not the fruit, but the company, because they've been in the headlines recently from the pivot that they've made away from electric vehicles and other things in the domain. But before we get started, I want to check in with the guys on a question. So, guys, as we've pivoted away from the usual check-in, doing a round robin of how everyone is doing, I came across a clip on Instagram, and it's which two would you pick? So I'm going to 5 different things and think about what two you would pick. Number 1, unlimited free flights for 15 years. Number 2, no mortgage in your current property. Number 3, $1,000. I said it was £1,000 per month for the rest of your life. Number 4, a new car, or number 5, £100,000 in cash. I will start because I've already had an insight into this. So just to quickly run through that again. Number 1, unlimited free flights for 15 years. Number 2, no mortgage. Number 3, £1,000 per month for the rest of your life. Number 4, a new car. Or number 5, £100,000 in cash. I chose number 1 and number 3. Unlimited flights for 15 years and £1,000 per month for the rest of my life.
Yeah,
Ollie, what would you pick?
I would go with the same because I didn't realize you said you could pick 2. Because initially I was thinking if you only pick the flight, right? One, you need to have residual income to be able to afford your lifestyle, etc., etc. But I think if I got unlimited flights and £1,000 a month with the other investments and plays I have, I think that's enough to enjoy 15. You said 15 years, right? 15 years of flights. Yeah, I'll be traveling quite a bit. Yeah, I'll go with that as well. The flight and the 1,000. What about yourself, P?
Yes, I'll go with the unlimited flights for 15 years because traveling is a currency and seeing different parts of the world and different people is just a gift. And then I'll take the very last option, which is £100,000 in cash, because I'm thinking about my skill set and being able to use that capital plus raise capital from investors and do a larger deal and make.
You want to raise capital for Timbo Capital? Come on.
Yeah, but no, I'm thinking about the opportunity. What £100,000 can do in terms of leverage. And then I think with that, I'll be able to, or definitely be able to generate more than £1,000 a month forever. So I basically get option 1, 2, I get 3 covered because the mortgage is covered anyway. I just don't get 4. I just don't get the new car. So I get it all. Winners take all. We don't have either or. Sure.
So I'm in agreement with all of you guys with regards to the flights. So I definitely would take that option because I think that's really worth quite a considerable amount over a period of time. I think actually out of those options, just doing a quick back of the envelope calculation, I would probably take paying off of the mortgage, because in terms of what I could get, if I paid it all off, then I can always refinance out and I'd probably get more than 100K and more than £1,000 over the short term per month for like a substantial number of years. So I'd probably take that option. Actually, I would take the holidays and then paying off of the mortgage with the assumption that I can then refinance out and then use some of that to move forward.
So wait,
can I go back on mine? I just did some calculations. Initially, one second. I just realized, that I did an emotional decision.
Yeah, that's fine.
And versus actually doing the maths. Because technically, you know what? It's fine.
One thing I was going to say though is Daniel did not reveal the new car. So is it our choice or is it something we're given?
Oh, it'll be your choice.
Yeah, see, that changes a lot. Anyways, that's just one thing. No, imagine you
could use a 500K car, and then
if I take a Bugatti, I can then sell it.
Yeah.
So now I'm up a couple £1,000,000. So it's the better option.
No, but because when you do the division, right, of the £1,000 a month, right, divide that by the 100K that he's talking about, it will take you 8 years to make that 100K. But because Daniel said you get it forever, right, then
Yeah.
in terms of you're gonna in the long run you're gonna earn a lot more than 100k, if that makes sense.
Olu's not hearing me. I said you can buy a Bugatti and sell it and be up a couple mil.
Yeah.
You're talking about £1,000 a month for.
Anyway, that was
just real quick. But on Shua's thinking, you're gonna pay down the mortgage, then you've
Yeah.
got the entire balance as equity. Then you're gonna
Yeah.
refinance on that. So you're basically just getting a new loan.
But then
You
you'll
might
get
wanna,
a
you might,
cash.
you might
in
want to
hand.
break that down, big man.
You'll get a cash.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
hand,
Basically, yeah, I'll get the cash in hand. So then, rather than
which will be large. So let's say, for example, you've got £1 million house, right? You pay off the £1 million,
Yeah.
right, mortgage,
yeah,
and then he can then take out a loan for another $1 million. Now he's got £1 million in cash, if he wanted to, or even half that, right?
yeah, that was the thinking.
Oh, cool. Anyway,
So who won then?
There's no right
There
or
was
wrong
no-
answer, man.
There's no.
Has
Like
So
you said, there's no,
competitive.
remember I said, there's no losers. There's no losers. We're all winners. We take everything. So you want?
Nah, I think if you chuck the Bugatti in there, I'm winning, man.
I'll tell you what.
Someone said,
I'll
yeah.
tell you what. Whoever chooses the car loses. So Pete, you lost. All right, cool.
The reason why, one, firstly, is a depreciated asset. Firstly,
I'm selling it.
Secondly, we've seen you're driving. You take out that lot. Man, you all over again.
Okay.
Yeah, with that, let's move on to the next. Kick off the episode.
Now that everyone's warmed up and got their juices flowing, let's move on to the meat of the conversation. So I want us to talk a bit about Apple in this episode. I think we've spoken about Apple in the past, but I just wanted us to. I think it would be a nice time for us to revisit them. So in the past 12 months, Tim Cook has been criticized for a lack of innovation, with the iPhone 15 being a very marginal improvement to the iPhone 12, 13, and 14. He was berated on Twitter for being a lack of innovator. Nothing has really improved since 2011, some may say, in terms of their products. Everything has been 0.5 to 1 improvement, apart from the Apple Watch, is what someone said on Twitter. Earlier this month, Apple released some new MacBooks, and in recent times, there hasn't been a notable change. The changes that they've made to the MacBook have been to the MacBook Air, their entry-level MacBook, which introduced 2 new sizes, a 13-inch and a 15-inch, which really deviates from the original MacBook Air anyway, which they launched many, many years ago in around 2010, 2011. The new iPads that are set to launch any day now, again, lack any sort of significant improvement. Rumors on the street is that they're going to be new models of the iPad Air and not being anything spectacular. And with the iPad Pro models just having a newly positioned camera being on the horizontal alignment, being at the center of a horizontal alignment. Apple reportedly has sold over 200,000 of its pricey Vision Pro AR headset. Upon its launch or upon its release, Apple got a lot of backlash to say that it wasn't going to do anything wildly different to already VR headsets that are already in production by other companies. In the first 10 days, though, however, pre-orders exceeded 200,000. Analysts are forecasting anywhere between 200,000 and up to 1 million in unit sales in 2024 for this $3,500 headset, which is very, very expensive. However, since its launch, sales have been decreasing, and now there's a chance for Apple to open up for global sales, as currently this headset is only being sold in the US. Also in China, Apple's iPhone sales were 24% lower in the first 6 weeks of 2024 compared to the same period last year. Sales declined by 12% in Q4 of 2023 due to local competition by the likes of Huawei, Oppo, and Vivo. Lastly, not to mention, in 2024, we've seen the biggest companies by market cap change significantly. So Nvidia, who've been in the headlines the last couple of months and much of last year, are now third behind Microsoft and Apple. Nvidia replaced Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company. And if we look at the top 3 by market cap, Microsoft is valued at 3.14 trillion, Apple at 2.7 trillion, and Nvidia shortly behind at 2.2. So my thinking, or my question for us to delve in is Apple's position of being in the top 2 biggest companies under threat by Nvidia, which look to make 2024 a very significant year of revenue for them? and what is next for Apple in terms of their products. The one product I didn't mention, which we're going to speak on in a moment, is this electric vehicle. We've heard Tesla, an electric vehicle. We've heard about Tesla's rival in China and their upcoming and biggest EV car maker in the world. But Apple recently announced that they're going to pivot away from launching an electric vehicle, which many, many people were looking forward to and thought this was going to be their next big break since the iPhone's release. However, they're not doing that anymore. With that said, Sherelle, why do you think Apple have pivoted away from an electric vehicle? How much have Apple invested in this project? What do you think the reasons were for them abandoning the project? Or do you think this will have any impact on their share price or shareholder sentiment?
Great. So thanks, Daniel, for a few great questions for us to think about. And I think unless you've been following Apple stock properly and in detail over the last few years, some people may not even be aware that they actually had this electric vehicle project ongoing. But recently it has come to the news because they had announced that they're actually scrapping the project and reallocating the resources dedicated to that project, which was their electronic vehicle, which they codenamed Project Titan. And they basically decided to reallocate those resources accordingly. So this project, which is called Project Titan, so it's reported that Apple has invested over $1 billion annually, and the project has, in terms of overall costs, accumulated what people are reporting more than $10 billion over its lifetime. So it's apparently a project that's been ongoing for more than a decade now. Now, in terms of why did they decide to abandon the project, there are a lot of reasons out there. A lot of it is speculation, but if you try to look at the Apple business model and also what is it that they're trying to double down on, clearly this Project Titan hasn't met some of their typical requirements. So as we all know, in the automotive industry, it's a very high cost and a low margin business. Tesla, which is one of the automotive darlings in the industry, which has had a share price that has ripped over the last 5 years, even they really struggle with the high cost and low margin. So this is ultimately a business model which is very, very competitive and tough to be in. Also, you can see how priorities have shifted. So a few years ago, Google had a self-driving technology car. Tesla is something that they're still working on. But now, as we see, things like AI is becoming even more important, AR is becoming even more important. And these are areas that Apple does already have some presence in, some skill set in, and some experience in as well. So probably there's been a shift of priorities. And then the last one I'd probably highlight was around the manufacturing challenges. With any hard device like a car, which requires multiple parts, multiple elements for supply chain, it's not an easy thing to manufacture versus a device like a phone or laptop, which is much more smaller, but probably requires a lot less machinery and a lot less heavy machinery as well. So if you combine all those factors together, it doesn't really come as a surprise that Project Titan, which is Apple's electric vehicle project, has been scrapped. The last thing that I'll just mention was regarding Daniel's question about how has investor sentiment changed and now that this announcement has happened. So it's difficult to tell exactly on a stock price because there's multiple factors that impact a stock price, as we've discussed before in previous episodes. But some implications in terms of the short term, it would definitely be a benefit because, as mentioned, over 10 billion spent, $1 billion annually. Now, if that project is scrapped, then that will become an instant cost saving, unless, of course, that cost base is reallocated elsewhere. Also, because of the fact that it is a low margin business, if they use that to shift towards their software services that they offer or some of the hardware devices that they are charging a premium pricing, then these are ultimately more profitable areas for the business. And I think combining the two, they are trying to reduce their risk. We've spoken about how in a higher interest rate environment, companies are looking at their cost bases differently, the same way that all of us personally are also looking at our cost bases differently as well. So I think they're looking at this to mitigate their risk and hopefully give them an opportunity to grow even further in some other categories that we'll talk about in today's episode.
No, I love sure a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, right? Like whilst sort of doing the research and looking into this particular episode, right? I took some notes of some key numbers, which I think you've addressed, but just for the listeners to just give some percentages, right? If we look at Apple's net profit around at the moment is around 25% is their net profit compared to Tesla, like you mentioned, which is roughly around 10 to 15%. So by them moving to that EV space, I feel like it's going to definitely dilute their margins. And myself as an investor, right? That's not what you want, right? You want to know that they're making a tremendous amount of cash and transferring that to their shareholders. And I think the other thing to think about it is what I loved most about this announcement is the fact that they were bold enough to say no and let's stop this. I think so many organizations start new innovations, new projects, and they never really reevaluate it to say this doesn't really make any sense. So yes, they spent 10 billion, and that sounds like a lot of money, but to Apple, that's not that much. Their net profit in 2023 was 97 billion. So that's like 10% of an annual net profit that was put aside to this particular project. So them doing it early enough, I think was a great news for the shareholders. And that EV space is just very competitive, right? We're talking about Tesla, but there's so many other Chinese competitors out there that will probably be able to make it at a lower cost, which again will challenge the margins as well. So, Shua, I really loved a lot of the points that you mentioned there.
Yeah, and I think just going back on that, what really fascinated me with Apple and pivoting to the electric vehicle was the fact that Apple have the target to be carbon neutral by 2030. And with the whole electric vehicles, people are now realizing that it's not necessarily the cars are great for the environment, but the use of the batteries and disposing of the batteries and the need to have new batteries inserted in new cars after about 5 years is probably going to have an impact on the environment. So I was intrigued to know what Apple would have come up as a sort of response to that, or as a solution. And I think, like you said, Olu, Tesla's great. Tesla's great in the US market, trying to have BYD, which eclipses Tesla. But really and truly, where was Apple's product market fit going to be? Was it going to be US? Was it going to be in Central Europe? Was it going to be in Southeast Asia? Where was it going to be? Or were they going to focus on the US? But the only thing I was really looking forward to was the ubiquitous of the Apple product, of it being everywhere. So how would your phone integrate with the phone? Your phone integrate with the car? How would an iPad integrate with the car? How would an Apple Watch or AirPods, all of these Apple products that are everywhere, how would that fit into the ecosystem of an Apple car? But alas, we will not find out. And sure, you mentioned something great in your opening about AR and AI, which is a great segue into the next part of this conversation and discussion, which is between Apple and Google being in discussion about a deal to bring generative AI in the iPhones. So this will be a partnership that would extend a long relationship between both the companies that has helped actually deliver everything from maps to search on Apple's devices. So what we're talking about is Google's Gemini. So Pete, how do you think this partnership will play out? What do you think this will have an impact to Apple's products? And does this mean Google always going to have the upper hand on Apple when it comes to products because they are the ones that create it? They can introduce it into their products first ahead of Apple. What do you think the dynamics may be?
Yeah. So I think the competition between Google and Apple is actually an interesting case to study. Statistically speaking, just to give people some context, globally, Android has around 70% of market share. But in the US, Apple actually has around 60%, which they've maintained since 2009. And so it's important for people to understand that what Apple and Google both compete, but they actually also work in partnership, which is also very profitable. To what you just mentioned, Daniel, Google's been paying Apple billions annually to make their search engine device option in the Safari web browser the number one option within the iPhone device. So when we think about competition, I see it more as sort of Apple's main competitor is sort of Samsung. And when we talk about this Gemini topic, which is grabbing the headlines now, it's definitely bolstered the share price as of recently once they've been sharing more information about the conversations. I was thinking about this, and I actually think it's a classic example of what Shuo's been talking about recently and covering in his recently takeaway episodes and also on social media, which is collaboration is the new competition. And I say that because if you look at Apple, in many ways, are behind in their sort of AI efforts and being innovative. I think we mentioned this early in the episode compared to its peers. And Gemini, I don't think has had the successful launch as what the expectation was when they first came out. And so there's potentially an opportunity for them to work together on where they perhaps, two is better than one. And I see in terms of competition, they're probably looking at Microsoft and OpenAI. So it's probably still early to understand with this potential because the deal's yet to be done. There's still a lot of antitrust and tape that needs to be worked through as to whether this can actually be done. But it's still not clear in terms of who's going to gain more share from this. If this will, it could actually be Google right now, actually not in the probably best position. I know they have to sort of improve their leadership and get a new CFO. Recent performance hasn't been so good. So this could actually be a move to help them maintain market share. So maybe in the short run, Google, maybe in the long run, it's Apple. But I think they can see the power of working together in order to not fall behind the curve of how AI can change the landscape. And perhaps if they don't do this deal or make this move, or at least work together in some capacity, Microsoft and OpenAI would perhaps take the market share. And that's something maybe they don't want to do. So yeah, that's sort of and I think in terms of what maybe we can expect, jokes aside, I was actually thinking we can expect just to pay more for the Apple devices, if this is to go ahead. And so I think from an end user standpoint, we probably get a much slicker, more efficient set of devices to use, because now it's integrated AI. And so you can, ask your phone, tell me what I've got in my calendar today, and more sophisticated ways of working with the phone. So I think for the user, you get a better end product, but you're gonna have to pay for it.
Have you guys considered? Because when I heard about the partnership with Google, one of the first thoughts was, why they're not partnering with OpenAI, right? A lot of, like you mentioned, Pibilo, a lot of the releases for Gemini and Google's AI tools weren't the best, right? So why isn't Apple going with OpenAI's quote unquote best in class with the Chat GPT? Any of you consider that?
I thought of that actually, because I thought when Google introduced Bard, which was to rival Open, ChatGPT, it had a horrible introduction to the market. It failed miserably. And for Apple to now choose or have a crucial vote of who to decide in introducing AI to their products, you'll think, oh, it's a no-brainer, we'll go with OpenAI. However, they've gone with Google. And the reason being is I think they've had this historical partnership since 2007. When the iPhone was launched, when the original iPhone, and I was fortunate to have it, had Maps, and Maps didn't work at all. Until they integrated Google into it, Maps was not an app you could use and guarantee you get to your destination safely. But with Google now being embedded within the Apple ecosystem, as well as the search and many other things, I think they want to deepen their partnership with Google. They probably work together well behind, the back end, can seamlessly integrate products into Apple products, and therefore they've chosen Google. I know they're probably not going to think it's an overnight success, but with Google, them being chosen and having Apple using their products, you could essentially overtake ChatGPT overnight by incorporating or partnering with Apple. So it's going to be a great, healthy competition over the years if Apple do choose Google to partner with. But one thing Tim Cook has said to investors, he's promised that generative AI will be in their products this year. So what that means, we don't know, but the likes of Samsung and Google have already introduced that into their products and allow it during video recording and other features. So, more to come and see what happens here.
Yeah. And just to add and tagging on to the earlier point, they're already making the investment, to your point, Olu. So every year they're paying 18 billion to have that partnership. So it's just kind of increasing that cost line to then further, try and capture market share in the space. So it's probably it's a probably easier move than to partner with someone else.
What could be more interesting is if Microsoft or OpenAI actually bring out a mobile phone, and what this mobile phone may do. Because in the past, in the 90s, there was the PDA, the personal digital assistant, which of course was Microsoft. But no, it's easy to say that because you often think your immediate rivals are the ones you look at. But when you look at MP3, the Walkman, no one thought that Apple or the MP3 would rival a Sony Discman or a Sony Walkman or a Sony mini disc player. Your competitor for the next 10 years is often someone who's not in the space right now.
We've got how many people in the world? 7 billion people?
Yeah.
How many Apple users? 2 to 3 billion people?
No idea.
Of like iPhones. So it's gonna take an incredible level of innovation for Microsoft to even make any sense in the investment of what it would take to put together a mobile phone and then actually try to have some success in the marketplace. We're just too brainwashed and indoctrinated with the Apple iPhone.
Especially in the Western.
Yeah,
the Western side, yeah.
I think you're better off placing your bet somewhere else. If I'm Microsoft and OpenAI.
Interesting.
Yeah,
See what
just just to add to the discussion as well, I think the way that I was also reflecting on the great comments so far is what can we take from this as business lessons and also maybe individual personal lessons as well. I think on the business lessons perspective, it doesn't matter how big your business is. These companies that we're talking about, Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, Apple, these are the companies that within their respective realms are really the top of the top, but still they're looking to grow, they're looking to collaborate, they're not trying to do everything on their own, and they're also having the courage, in this case Apple's, to withdraw on a very big project. So I think for us individually, that could mean being much more open to collaborating with other people, doing business partnerships with others, but also as individuals, never thinking that we should rest on our laurels, because however great we're doing personally, I don't think any of us are the apples of our respective worlds. And then if these large companies are continuing to invest and develop themselves even further, then I think it gives us a lot of food for thought in terms of our own self-development journey and also collaboration journey as well.
In fact, I think that's great. And for anyone who hasn't been paying attention to our episodes, it's clear that Shoel's theme for this year is collaboration. So expect more of that.
Try to plug it as whenever I can,
So, like, Olu, what you're coming to you on thinking, what do you think Apple's next break could be, or where do you think, or which product do you think they should double down on to have that renewed energy, renewed focus, that renewed buzz of Apple in the marketplace?
Yeah.
Or
So
what's a better investment? Oh, wait.
exactly. I think when you
Hold
ask
on
this
now.
question, so go.
So Shmuel threw me off in the question. I thought it was like a proper question, but then I didn't understand the width. So I was like, bro, what's this? Yeah, carry on.
So thinking about what Apple should invest in, right? First, I started off by looking at their revenue. So they make roughly around, was it 383 billion a year? Now, the majority of that obviously comes from the hardware and the iPhone, for roughly around 200 billion, right? The rest comes from sort of their services, their wearables section, right? And as Pabilo alluded to, right, the majority of their sales comes from the US, or at least the Western society. If I think about sort of the America market share, they're around 61% of the market share in the US, right? So when I think about what next for Apple and the fact that they've been able to penetrate quite a lot in the US, for me is how do they look at increasing their penetration outside, like worldwide, outside of the US? So when you now look at their market share outside of the US, I think they only make up roughly around 20%. That's a vast difference. And I believe as other countries start to increase their GDP, their disposable income, naturally they're going to start to move towards Apple products, because as much as a lot of us don't like to admit, Apple products is a status play, right? If you have an Android versus an Apple product in the Western society, right? You're seen as having more wealth, you're seen with having more status, you're seen as being cooler by having the Apple product, right? I think other Western countries are going to start to be more like that, excluding China. I think there's complexity there. So I think that's really how does Apple start to draw and win more market share in a lot of the non-Western countries. If it's about maybe slightly reducing the prices there, right, so that they can gain more market share. But I think when I look deeper into Apple's financials and what next for them, I focus more on their cash, right? So a lot of people are talking about innovation with Apple having to develop new products. I think the treasure that Apple has is the large amount of cash on hand that they have. I think they got roughly around, if I remember correctly, 30 billion of cash on hand. So, what better than acquiring companies, right? I think people don't realize there's organic and inorganic growth, right? I think a lot of us are expecting Apple to come up with the next technology or the next innovation, but Apple hasn't really been known for that. If you think about smartphone, they weren't the first one to come up with a smartphone. They weren't the first one to come up with a laptop. So why not leverage the cash you've got on hand to acquire businesses, especially in the AI space? So we've talked about Gemini, but there's so many different places that they can acquire businesses in the AI space. Now,
but Ollie, just to cut you there, and I don't disagree the fact that they didn't create the smartphone, but they revolutionized the way the smartphone is. And if you're saying they've got 30 billion in reserves, why aren't they doing something now to revolutionize the next product? What's taken them so long, like 10-year gap, 13-year gap, to do something new?
one thing about Apple is they're not public about what they're doing. So a lot of times with the innovation, we didn't hear about the Vision Pro years ahead of them releasing it, right? They normally only talk when they have a product ready to launch. It's pretty much in the year of it. So I wouldn't be surprised if, let's take for example, Siri. Siri has been a useless application on the iPhone for a long period of time, right? I've never asked Siri a question in my life, right? But imagine if they're able to connect that with AI companies that they've been acquiring. Now, going back to like the companies they've acquired, out of all of the top sort of 7 top companies, tech companies, Apple have actually acquired the most amount of AI companies with like around 32 companies. And this isn't comparable to Google, I think have acquired around 21, Meta 18, Microsoft 17, Amazon 10. So they're working in the background when it comes to acquiring a lot of these AI companies. And I wouldn't be surprised if they plug it into their Siri functionality, make it in such a way that you have like a personal assistant on your phone, which can um, which can do tasks for you, um, which can um, be just pretty much like your personal assistant, right? So I think that is really the place where they can go further, and also on their services business. The services, the ecosystem that they've created, the moment you get locked into Apple, you can't leave that ecosystem. You find yourself on that Apple store. Like I remember I didn't have an iPhone for a long period of time. Then it was like an iPhone. Then I was like, oh, let me get a MacBook. Oh, you know what? That would be nice with an Apple Watch. Oh, now I've got the AirPods. I was like, when the Apple Pods came out, I was like, this looks stupid. I'm never gonna purchase something like that. Look at me now. Yeah. So that ecosystem will continue growing. And I know I don't want to continue for too long. And then my last way of them innovating, right? Outside of just AI and using the cash to acquire businesses, is through their brand. Now, Apple has got a cult following, right? And the moment they do some level of innovation to their phone, right? Whenever that is, I'm not saying it's going to be the next one, whenever that is, people will be running to the store to acquire it, right? If it's they make it transparent, if it's they make it flippable, whatever they decide to do, people will be running out to get it. So I'm still a heavy believer in Apple. Um, I think a lot of people talk about innovation, innovation. Let's be honest, most companies haven't really innovated in the last 10 years, right? You haven't really heard much about those innovations. Um, but I just think by them still having a cash cow based on their business model, they should just continue acquiring lots of different companies, bring them into the Apple sort of ecosystem, bring them into the Apple quality of products, because Apple don't release anything unless it's a quality product, and then they'll be fine. They'll be fine. I'm still bullish.
I disagree that Apple don't release anything that's a quality product. They create products that are aesthetically pleasing.
Did you say
not
not
always great.
quality?
Yeah, the HomePod. The HomePod has no function, no use.
Or is it a quality product?
I
In
said,
terms
I
of
said aesthetically look wise and what it
Yeah.
looks like.
Mm.
But in terms of the quality of its usefulness, they're not always useful products that they create.
When I
That's
mean
what
quality, I'm not talking about functionality. I'm talking about build quality. Like in terms
Oh,
of my
sorry,
MacBook,
sorry, Apple Genius rep.
I just want to specify, yeah. When I like this is my this laptop that I'm using now to record this podcast is my second MacBook that I've ever owned, right? The first one I purchased was at university, right? I had that MacBook for 10 years and it was reliable. This one, I'm sure I could keep for another 5 years, right? 10 years, and it'll be reliable. I can't say the same about some of the other laptops where every 2 years.
No,
it needs
I
to be replaced.
think I don't disagree with you. I'm just talking about in terms of every product that they create good quality build, which probably
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily warrant the price, but what makes it an expensive luxury item. But 2 things to what you said. Like you said, it has a cult following, which I somewhat agree with, but it's more to the point of how known and how out there and just everyday item it is for people, predominantly in the US. Everywhere you look in the US, everyone's got an iPhone. Got a friend who moved to the US. He's a prolific Android user, loves Android, will never touch Apple. I saw him, was like, "You got iPhone?" He's like, "Yeah, I had to." He said, "Everyone here's like messaging on iMessage. They don't use WhatsApp or anything like that. They use iMessage." And it's like, you have to have an iPhone, otherwise people look at you like there's something like you've got a few screws loose. Pete, you know the person as well. So he's a proper Android guy. He's Android to the core. But then when I saw the app, I was like, "Whoa, something's happening here." And then to the second point about Apple's innovation going forward, I also see it as innovative with, or I wouldn't say innovation or products, but more of bolstering their revenue stream is through their subscription services. I pay them $8.99 a month, £107 a year on 2 terabytes of iCloud storage a month. And lo and behold, I've almost eclipsed that 2 terabytes. The next bundle up is 8 terabytes, which is £25. That's £300 a month just from me, just to keep myself on the cloud and to be on Apple product. And this is only going to grow over time because now that I've got 2 terabytes or 100, my phone's 256 gigabytes. And every time they bring a new phone out, they increase the storage, which people don't realize, oh, more storage, I put more stuff on it. But if you want to now leave Apple, how are you going to get all of that data away? All right, guys, so it's been a lovely episode. Olu, aka Mr. Apple Genius Bar rep, telling us why Apple is great for the future. He's still bullish on it for the next 10 years. They ain't going nowhere. The only way they're climbing is taking off, knocking Microsoft off their perch to take the number one market. Okay, so that's been a wonderful episode. Anyone got anything last thing to say?
No, I'm good on my side. I just wanted to try to eclipse my oil and gas rep that these people have given me. I wanted to try and move to more of the tech side. So that's why I had to be heavy on the Apple.
Okay, great. But thank you all for listening to episode 228 of Take Flight Podcast. We hope you found this deep dive in Apple, their pivot away from electric vehicles, and what's next for them insightful. If you've got any comments for us, or if you think any differently, feel free to DM us on Instagram, Take Flight Podcast, comment on our videos on YouTube, or comment on our posts on Instagram. As always, find us additionally on TikTok. And until next week, stay safe and God bless.
Take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but